The Gilded Age Season 3 has just come to an end, and I'm so glad that the show got commissioned for Season 4, because following that ending, I need to know what's going to happen with George and Bertha. Following George knocking on death's door at the end of the previous episode, we saw his recovery being something that took centre stage, whilst also Bertha's yearning to rise to the top of high society as a result of using the very people that she loved. Whilst the figurehead Russells might not have got the happy ending in the season, we did see the likes of Gladys, Peggy, Larry, Marian, Jack, and even Agnes and Ada getting fitting endings for their stories at the end of Season 3. So with that, let's break down the ending of Season 3 and all the important details. Here is the Gilded Age Season 3 Episode 8 Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. George and Bertha. During this episode, the first thing that we saw was an overriding sense of panic that was present due to George being shot and it being unknown whether or not he was going to survive. With Dr. Kirkland being across the road whilst visiting Peggy, he entered the house and was able to save George's life and get him on the road to recovery, especially whilst Dr. Logan wasn't present. The love and care that we saw from Bertha throughout this episode was in complete contrast to everything else that we'd seen from her in the season. No longer was she looking inwards, but she was looking outwards instead. Seeing that pain on her face and the look of hopelessness in her eyes matched that of what we saw at the end when George left for New York. So it showed that in that moment she felt like she was going to lose him all over again, but in a different way. What this episode did a really good job at was making it out like the family was almost repaired and it had returned to that place of stability and tranquility. Bertha even said that she was going to cancel the ball in Newport, but George refused to allow her to do it, positioning it as a way for her to cement her claws into society even more and rise above Mrs Astor, when in reality it was done as a way of George going out there and showing that he was still strong, fit, healthy, and that the railway project would be able to continue, meaning that there'd be no doubts about him. Bertha also spent a lot of this episode dealing with the controversial decision on lifting the ban on divorced women being able to attend the ball, and she decided to stand by it. This meant that the likes of Aurora and also Mrs. Astor's daughter were able to attend. However, with the ending seeming like Bertha could end up on her own, in the next season the decision to lift the ban could look like a selfish one in high society because she could end up being separated from George, so that most likely won't go down well. There was a lot of focus on the future in this episode due to the way that the rules of high society were changing, and the future for the Russells is one that looks uncertain for sure. George said a line of dialogue which I thought perfectly summed up Bertha's mindset. He said, "I don't blame you for being ruthless. I admire it. It's what we share. I'm just ruthless for the people I love, not with them." George awakening from this shooting and mending himself back to full health has pretty much meant that he's got a new mindset and he's looking at his life completely differently. So maybe, just maybe, he doesn't want Bertha in his life meddling with the people that he cares about most like she'd previously been doing. He couldn't forgive himself for allowing Gladys to walk down the aisle when at the time it was the last thing that she wanted to do in the world, even though now she's happy and in love with Hector. It's a regret that he'll probably take to the grave, and one where it wouldn't have happened if he'd just stood up to his wife at the time. We found out that in this instance, George actually took a leaf out of Bertha's book, and he only attended the ball so that he could show strength that he was still there, so that there'd be no doubt that the railway project would be jeopardized, using his wife and her event for his own personal gain. And what did we see? Bertha absolutely hated it, so it was interesting seeing the roles reversed. That final shot of Bertha looking out the window on the cusp of tears as George was headed back to New York, not being able to tell him that their daughter was carrying their grandchild. It showed how next year she might well end up attending the ball as a divorcee, just like the many that she invited herself. George and Bertha's marriage is on the rocks, and I think we could potentially see them getting divorced in the next season of the show. Just look at the real-life Elva Belmont. Peggy and Dr. Kirkland. One of the other largest stories to feature in this finale was surrounding Peggy and Dr. Kirkland, and the fact that William was planning on confronting Peggy about her past. Honestly, this was utterly heartbreaking because Peggy thought that she was going to ask her to marry him, and the score in the background was filled with love, ambition, and a sense of happiness. But then, when it cut to them being together, it was dead silent, and it filled the room more than the music did, showing a complete contrast in the mood. Throughout the entirety of this season, it's felt like Dr. Kirkland was never truly good enough for Peggy because he wasn't willing to stand up to his mother who kept trying to put poison in his ear about her and her past, using it as a weapon against Peggy. Honestly, I loved the fact that Dorothy stepped towards Mrs. Kirkland and didn't hold her tongue, because in that scene she genuinely did come across as the most spiteful and vindictive that we've ever seen her. Dr. Kirkland's father was even standing up for Peggy when she wasn't there, looking for his son to put his happiness above everything rather than that of what the rest of society would think, hence why he said to his son that he trusted that he'd do the right thing. It's funny how in seeing Dr. Kirkland eventually standing up to his mother and being on the side of Peggy, it instantly showed that he started to become worthy of her. He was originally valuing his mother's happiness over his own and over the woman that he loved. So when he went to the ball and asked Arthur if he could marry his daughter, it just felt perfect. The smile that was on her face is something that was just so lovely to look at, and the sheer happiness that she embodied because she was finally with the person that she loved most in the world was just the perfect ending to Peggy. Larry and Marian. Larry and Marian had a similar journey in this episode because when Larry arrived home and saw his father lying there, potentially dying on the table, that was all he could think about. Marian had realised that she'd made a mistake in not believing Larry about what happened at the Haymarket because Jack told her that he was with him the whole time and there wasn't anything bad that occurred. And to be honest, even though Marian said that all she's ever done is get hurt by men and that's why she felt like that, if I were Larry, I'd be hurt at the fact that she believed Jack and not him. So that's why he was relatively resistant to getting back with Marian right away. Plus, his father was on the cusp of death, so that was taking priority. Marian was there on the night where George was shot, and she actually got involved with the doctor and put pressure on his wound, contributing to making sure that George didn't die. This was something that actually made Bertha's mind come around, and she saw the reason as to why Larry could have been in love with Marian, even vocalizing how she was disappointed that Larry wasn't back with her and that things weren't working out. Marian got to the point where she couldn't see the both of them being back together, and she felt as if she'd messed things up. When she took a moment and got some air right at the end of the ball, Larry went out there and mentioned how all of their issues weren't going to be solved that day, and that they'd make mistakes together in the future because that's what life is, because it isn't perfect. If I'm being honest, this is now starting to be quite a drawn-out love story, and whilst I do like it and I think they'll be good together, I think the next season should definitely see them just tie the knot, because we don't need any more will they, won't they between the two characters. The Forte Household. There were a couple of different things that happened with Agnes, Ada and Oscar in this episode. The first is that Ada got in contact with the New York Heritage Society, and it turned out that they weren't actually looking for a donation from Agnes. Instead, they wanted to use her name and make her vice president of it, showing that she got the wrong end of the stick, and even though moments earlier she simply said that she never admitted that she was wrong because she was never wrong in her eyes, it then made sense as to why Ada rolled her eyes because she knew that she was wrong about that very thing. The next thing was that after this season being about the sisters feuding over who was head of the house and Agnes feeling like she couldn't give up the position because of the shame that she felt, with her actually saying out loud to somebody how she didn't have the means like she used to, she finally allowed Ada to sit at the head of the table. That little wink that she gave Ada was a moment that I thought was so wholesome. Agnes can be cold and frosty, but she does often have these moments where the care that she has for her family comes front and center, and this was a prime example of that. The final thing was then with Oscar. Oscar's got this newfound confidence that he's using to elevate his position in society. He's over mourning John Adams, and he's actually using the home that was given to him in his will as a way of having some kind of freedom. He was viewed as somebody that managed people's money, but he looked at it as a way of managing people's lives. So when he saw Mrs. Winterton, he asked her if she wanted to team up with him, marry each other, so when they're combined with her money and his connections, there'd be an unstoppable force. They both have homes outside of the city, so when they wanted to be with somebody else, they could do it there. However, when they'd both be in the city, they'd be a married couple, and it would be treated like business. So this feels like it's an avenue that we're going to see getting explored more in the new season. Oscar's rise to a height that we've not seen him at before. And if Mrs. Winterton does rise up the social ladder a little bit, with Bertha falling, she might just rise above her. My review of the episode. I thought this was a really strong finale to the season. I thought it concluded by answering all of the questions that I had on the different character arcs, and it left the biggest one of them all open, the one surrounding George and Bertha's marriage. Honestly, I thought they were going to be happy following George awakening from his near-death experience, so seeing him not truly being sure was something that really did shock me. He cares about his family a lot, and seeing it all just being played with over the season is something that made him just feel like he was disappointed. One story that I think we got glimpses of in the season that I hope we see more of is Jack and Bridget. I think they're a couple that would work so well together, and in hearing that it seemed like she was a little bit jealous because of the young maids that he had there showed that she was definitely keen. The drama around George being shot was something that I thought was handled really well. The tension was so high and I was so invested in seeing how it was going to unfold. When it cut to black after his body went into shock, it did make me question if he was going to survive or not. So I am glad that we saw him have a new lease of life and not fade into darkness. One critique I would say I've got about this episode is that for a large part of it, it did feel quite choppy. I understand that they were leaning into the chaoticness of George being in an unknown state and people finding out the news, so there was a lot to deal with, but I did find it a little jarring to start with because it was just so choppy. When it came to the ball, I thought that it was just all executed in such a regal way. The set, the decor, the outfits, the dancing, it just looked incredible, and it was definitely worth waiting for the finale for something like that. My favourite performance in this episode has to be Bertha Russell. We saw a completely different side to her to usual, with the love, panic, and emotions that she was emitting. But for me, especially the ending, that upset that was on her face was something that I just bought into instantaneously. And I can't wait to see if her heart is going to be broken in the next season or not. This season has hands down been the best that there's been of the Gilded Age, so I'm grateful that the show is only getting better and better. It puts us in a good position for season 4 when it hopefully gets released in around a year's time, and I'm hoping we don't have to wait around 2 like we did with this one. So, there you have it, the Gilded Age Season 3 Episode 8 Ending Explained.